getting. Big mistake I see from new investors is the emotional attachment. When I do go into a triage property and I say plaid sofa doesn't necessarily match the aesthetic that this, clientele is looking for, maybe we should replace it. But you get really upset because of how much you spent or how much work it was to bring in or how heavy it was. That's going to hinder your business.
For sure. From a staging standpoint, how do you go about staging? Do you hire somebody to stage it, or do you stage it yourself, or do you have like a checklist that you ask your guests, like because your properties are so geographically located and you are doing a majority of them like remotely?
So one of the mistakes I made in the beginning as a co-host was taking the property as it was and making myself adjust. And then after I got to about 6 or 8 properties, I realized that's no longer feasible. The only way that I could scale up more than that was to standardize the properties. And then, of course, maybe you offer some custom items. Like I'm not going to give you a kayak if you are located in Chicago, but if you're on a lake, I will. But most of the amenities or the items that are in the properties, I try to standardize as much as possible. I used to hire stagers when I first began. And there was one woman in particular, her properties were beautiful. She did an amazing job, but her specialty was aesthetic. And it looked like a magazine printed every single listing that she created. And that's why I liked working with her. The problem was she was designing for aesthetic, whereas I needed someone to design for short-term rental. And I quickly found that at least in my markets, there were no one or very few people that offered that. Because if you set the house up correctly, then it can run smoothly. So I'll give you a great example. The headboard that's behind me is a rattan. You can wipe it down with some Windex. You can dust it off with a Swiffer. It's simple, it's easy. Whereas the stager that I was working with loved velvet headboards. Beautiful, luxurious. The problem is they became lint collectors. And every single time we were having to brush a microcloth across it to get it clean. And then anytime someone would touch it, it would leave a little divot in the velvet. If someone swiped their hand across, you could see where they touched it. So we had, even though hers were beautiful, we had such different goals with what we needed in a headboard. I don't want to have to clean a bunch of upholstery. So now when I'm staging, I'm very minimal. Here's another example. I started using floating lamps because very seldom would the housekeepers lift the lamp and wipe off the side table. So then I would go visit a property, go to lift the lamp, and of course someone's drink has leaked under it or whatever has happened, or it's just big and taking up space on a side table. Cool.
Plus, these scones kind of look beautiful from a picture standpoint.
I appreciate that.
Yep.
The cheaper it is, the cheaper it's going to look and the less it's going to hold up. If you go super aesthetic, great. Go to, West Elm and Crate and Barrel and design your whole house, but you're going to spend a lot more money, and it may be, a teddy bear white fabric that's not good for functionality. And so you really have to play with all three of those to get something that makes sense.
Absolutely. Then the next step is listing creation and pricing and all that stuff, right? How do you go about that? Do you outsource that to somebody? Do you do it in-house? And pictures, photography as well. It's important.
It really depends on the type of listing. So typically I will build the listing myself. That's something I enjoy, something I tend to be good at. So that's where I put my energy. For photography, if you have an immaculate listing, and you really want to show it off, hire a professional photographer. It'll be the best decision you've ever done. For me, this cabin, we are certainly going to hire a photographer. It's tiny. It's about 500 square feet, sleeps two, very romantic, intimate setting. I don't necessarily want professional photos there because I don't want people to think that it's grander than it truly is. So I actually took all the photos for that one myself. I also don't bring in as much revenue there. It's a very small, intimate cabin, whereas this one's 3 stories. So it kind of just depends on photos for me. I know there are some people who are die hard no matter what, get professional photos.
Yeah, setting
And
up the right expectations and delivering on those expectations.
yes. And if
That's the
anything,
biggest thing.
I under promise and over deliver. So I tend to err on the side of let's, hold back so that when people get there, they're like, wow, the
Versus
review.
the opposite.
Yeah,
Because
really.
most of the people are running towards creating a better listing, regardless of whether the house or the accommodation will be true to that listing or not.
Yes. And you want to be
And
true.
that's a different perspective. Yeah.
If you have to choose between the two of, do I want to make it look amazing and blow people out of the water online, or do I want to do that in person? I'd rather do that in person. I'd rather them be enamored when they get there and, this is a 5-star stay versus, it looked bigger in the photos. It looked brighter in the pictures. Wow, the listing description said that this was luxurious and XYZ, and I'm just not that impressed because those
Sure.
are two very different guest experiences.